Let's be honest. For a solid chunk of our lives, our parents were the absolute source of all knowledge. They were walking encyclopedias of wisdom, the final authority on how the world worked. The only problem? A lot of that knowledge was completely, hilariously, and sometimes dangerously wrong. Today, we're counting down 101 of the dumbest, most outdated, and downright bizarre life lessons that were drilled into our heads as gospel. This is the stuff that made us who we are. For better, or most likely for worse. 1. The all-time classic romantic advice. If a boy is pulling your hair and being a total jerk, he secretly has a massive crush on you. Let's translate this insanity. This has single-handedly taught generations that emotional abuse is just a quirky prelude to a first date. 2. That number on your credit card statement? That's not a debt limit. It's a challenge. A personal high score you're meant to achieve. The bank wants you to hit it. This single piece of financial genius is the direct pipeline from new car smell to a lifetime diet of instant ramen. 3. Forget physics. Here's some real talk from Dad. Seatbelts are a death trap. You're far better off being launched through the windshield like a human cannonball. Why? So you're not trapped in the wreckage? Apparently, landing on asphalt at 60 miles per hour is just a minor inconvenience. 4. You will respect your elders, period. No exceptions, even if their only contribution to dinner is a casually racist comment and advice to cure cancer with essential oils. Their age is a VIP pass for saying and doing literally anything. What a fantastic system. 5. Lost in the woods? Simple. Just find moss on a tree. It always grows on the north side. Except, it doesn't. It grows wherever it's dark and damp. This brilliant tip has turned countless survival situations into aimless nature walks ending in a helicopter ride. 6. The floor is lava, but only after a 5-second countdown. This sacred rule assumes that germs have the politeness to check their watches before swarming your dropped slice of pizza. It's a beautiful fantasy where bacteria respect the rules of the playground. 7. Need a job? Just march right in there. Give the manager a firm handshake and ask for one. This advice comes from a time before online applications, keyword filters, and security guards who will happily tase you for bypassing the front desk. Good luck with that. 8. Never ever go to bed angry. Sounds romantic, right? Wrong. It's a recipe for a delirious 3 a.m. argument where you're both too tired to form coherent sentences. Nothing solves a problem faster than weaponized exhaustion and word salad accusations. 9. If a wild animal isn't running away from you, it obviously wants to be petted. That bison isn't frozen in place because it's confused by your stupidity. It's calculating the optimal angle to launch you into the next county. They're not being friendly, they're just hungry. 10. Just ignore the bullies and they'll get bored and go away. This is the ultimate strategy of doing absolutely nothing. Ignoring a bully doesn't make them go away. It just confirms to them that you're the perfect, non-confrontational target for the rest of the school year. 11. You will finish everything on your plate. Why? Because there are starving children in a country you've only seen on the evening news. Your forced consumption of lumpy mashed potatoes was somehow a magical act of charity that would solve world hunger. It was a masterclass in weaponized guilt. 12. The ironclad law of summer. Do not swim for at least 30 minutes after eating. Violate this rule, and you'd be seized by a phantom cramp and instantly sink to the bottom of the pool. This myth was responsible for more bored, sweaty kids staring at a perfectly good pool than anything else in history. 13. Sitting too close to that giant wooden console TV will make you go blind. This wasn't a medical warning. It was a tactical maneuver. The real lesson had nothing to do with your eyesight and everything to do with you. Stop blocking your dad's view of the game. 14. And for the times logic failed, here was the nuclear option. Because I said so. This wasn't a reason. It was a verbal brick wall, signaling the immediate and total collapse of rational discussion. It taught us that in the real world, a good argument often loses to a louder voice. 15. Eat your carrots, they give you night vision. We all believed we were one vegetable away from being a low-budget superhero. Turns out, this was literal British propaganda from World War II, to cover up their new radar technology. Your parents were just unknowingly passing on military deception. 16. If you swallow that piece of bubblegum, it stays inside you for 7 years. 7 years. It was the childhood equivalent of a life sentence. We all pictured a growing, monstrous gumball of doom just sitting in our stomachs, waiting. It was pure, unadulterated fear-mongering. 17. Cracking your knuckles will give you arthritis. This was presented as undisputed medical fact, right up there with gravity. The goal wasn't to save you from future joint pain, it was to make you stop that annoying popping sound. And it worked beautifully. 18. If you cross your eyes and the wind changes, your face will get stuck that way, permanently. This was the ultimate threat against childhood silliness, a meteorological warning that could lead to a lifetime of facial horror. Nobody ever tested it, just in case. 19. A little hard work never hurt anybody. This was usually said right before your dad handed you a shovel and pointed to a massive back-breaking chore. It was a fantastic way to get free child labor for a project that was definitely going to hurt somebody, namely you. 20. The ultimate home remedy for everything from a cold to a sore muscle. Just slather it in Vicks VapoRub. Got a cough? Rub it on your chest. Sore feet? Put it on your socks. This minty, greasy cure-all was the Swiss Army knife of 20th century medicine. 21. Don't turn on that dome light in the car, it's illegal. This was the great parental lie. Every kid in America believed that flipping that little switch would instantly summon the police. The truth? It was just distracting, and they wanted you to stop messing with stuff. 22. Money doesn't grow on trees. This was the official shutdown notice for any request costing more than $5. It was the verbal equivalent of a slammed door, a lesson not in economics, but in the finality of your parents' checking account balance. 23. Got a toothache? Your grandpa's advice was simple. Just rub a little whiskey on your gums. Forget modern dentistry. The old way involved getting a minor buzz while your tooth continued to rot. It didn't solve the problem, but for a few minutes, you probably didn't care. 24. Children should be seen and not heard. This wasn't just a saying. For many, it was the prime directive. It was the golden rule for any visit to a relative's house, ensuring that the adults could talk in peace while the kids just sat there, silently bored out of their minds. 25. Just be yourself. This sounds like great advice, until you realize it's what they say before a job interview where they actually want a corporate drone, or before meeting new in-laws who are expecting a saint. Sometimes, being yourself is the fastest way to get rejected. 26. Scraped your knee open on the sidewalk? The prescribed medical treatment was simple. Just rub some dirt in it. This wasn't first aid. It was a character-building exercise in ignoring a potential tetanus infection. The real lesson here wasn't about healing, but about teaching you to shut up and stop bleeding on the good concrete. 27. The most terrifying phrase in the English language. Wait until your father gets home. This wasn't just a threat. It was a form of psychological warfare. It turned your home into a 6-hour-long horror movie prologue, where the monster was your dad, and the crime was probably leaving a toy in the hallway. 28. The chickenpox party. Instead of, avoiding a highly contagious disease, your parents would intentionally drive you to a friend's house to get infected. It was a biohazard potluck, a strategic move to get it over with. This is the kind of logic that today would get a visit from Child Protective Services. 29. The customer is always right. This beautiful, shining lie was presented as the gospel of commerce. It wasn't a business philosophy, it was a training manual for how to get walked all over. This single lesson is responsible for creating an entire generation of entitled customers who think they can demand anything. 30. Thirsty on a summer day? No need to go inside, just drink directly from the garden hose. We were all told it was perfectly fine, a refreshing blast of pure nature. In reality, we were chugging down a delightful cocktail of bacteria, lead, and whatever chemicals the dog just peed on. Hydration at its finest. 31. Go to college, get a degree, and you'll be set for life. This was sold as the unbreakable success formula, the golden ticket. It was a fantastic plan, right up until the moment everyone else got a degree too. And you found yourself with $50,000 in debt, applying for a job that barely requires a high school diploma. 32. It's rude to talk about money. This lesson in social etiquette was actually a brilliant way to ensure that none of us ever learned how to negotiate a salary, invest, or ask a coworker what they make. It created a generation of people who were terrified to talk about the one thing that controls almost everything. 33. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. This sounds polite, but it's actually fantastic advice for raising someone who never stands up for themselves, avoids all conflict, and lets people get away with murder. It's less about being kind and more about being a silent, passive observer. 34. Stay loyal to one company and they'll take care of you. This advice came with a fantasy of a gold watch and a comfortable pension. This corporate fairy tale died somewhere around 1985. The real lesson we learned was that loyalty is a one-way street, and your decades of service are worth less than a rounding error on a spreadsheet. 35. The only thing you needed to know about stranger danger was a single, oddly specific warning. Never, ever take candy from a stranger. That was it. As if kidnappers were just wandering around with pockets full of Tootsie Rolls. A free puppy, a cool video game, a ride in a spaceship. Apparently, those were all perfectly fine. Scene 36. Feed a cold, starve a fever. Or was it starve a cold, feed a fever? Nobody ever really knew, but everyone repeated it with the certainty of a seasoned doctor. This was less a piece of medical advice and more of a confusing guessing game you played while feeling absolutely miserable. 37. The ultimate parental cop-out. You'll understand when you're older. This was the answer to every complex question you ever asked, from "Why is the sky blue?" to "Why do we have to pay taxes?" It was a brilliant way to end a conversation without having to admit they didn't know the answer either. 38. You can be anything you want to be, as long as it's not an artist, musician, or writer. The follow-up lesson to any creative dream was the Starving Artist Lecture. They encouraged you to have hobbies, but the second you thought about making a living from it, they painted a grim picture of you living in a cardboard box. 39. If you sit on cold concrete, you'll get hemorrhoids, or kidney problems, or something vaguely terrible and lower body related. This wasn't based on any medical science. It was a shockingly effective way to stop you from sitting on the curb and getting your new pants dirty. Pure fear-based laundry management. 40. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. This simple phrase was repeated as if it were the 11th commandment. While apples are fine, this lesson conveniently ignored genetics, accidents, and the thousands of other diseases that couldn't care less about your fruit intake. It was the original health life hack, and it was mostly wrong. 41. The ultimate law of winter wellness. Never, ever go outside with wet hair. It was believed that the combination of damp hair and cold air didn't just give you the sniffles. It was a magical formula for instant, life-threatening pneumonia. This wasn't medical advice, it was a law of physics. Viruses and bacteria weren't the enemy. A damp scalp was. 42. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. This was the go-to advice for anyone facing any kind of hardship. It's a powerful, inspiring image, except for one tiny detail. It's a physically impossible act. This lesson conveniently ignored things like systemic issues, economic downturns, or just plain bad luck, boiling all of life's failures down to you not trying hard enough. 43. The single greatest lie in the history of parenting, usually uttered right before a spanking. This is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. It was a bizarre attempt at emotional jujitsu, a way to claim the moral high ground while holding all the power. They're holding the weapon, you're the one about to cry, but somehow, they are the true victim in the situation. 44. Before streaming services, there was the sacred ritual of adjusting the TV's rabbit ears. This was presented as a dark art that only your dad understood, a delicate ballet of aluminum foil and precise positioning. The lesson was that technology was a fickle god that required a special kind of magic. In reality, Your dad was just wiggling two metal sticks around until the picture got less fuzzy. 45. The joy of receiving a gift was immediately followed by the soul-crushing dread of having to write a thank you note. This wasn't about teaching gratitude. It was an exercise in forced, stilted, formal writing to an aunt for a pair of socks you already hated. The real lesson wasn't appreciation, but an early introduction to the tedious bureaucracy of adult life. 46. The parental ultimatum. I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2. This was supposed to be the most terrifying countdown in a child's universe. But the real lesson was in what happened at 3. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was the ultimate bluff, a masterclass in empty threats that taught us that sometimes authority has no real follow-through. 47. The career path trifecta. You should be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. These were presented as the only 3 valid jobs in existence. Anything else, especially anything creative, was seen as a one-way ticket to poverty and familial disappointment. It wasn't about finding your passion. It was about securing a bragging right for your parents at their next dinner party. 48. Honesty is the best policy. This was repeated like a mantra, right up until the moment you were honest about not liking your grandma's cooking, or when you told them what you really thought about their new haircut. Suddenly, the policy changed to learning how to tell strategic, polite, little white lies to keep the peace. 49. The old barbershop myth. If you shave, the hair will grow back thicker, darker, and angrier. This piece of pseudoscience was so powerful, it stopped entire generations from touching a razor until it was way too late. It wasn't about biology. It was a scare tactic designed to delay the inevitable for as long as humanly possible. 50. Answering the phone wasn't a casual act. It was a formal performance. You had to say your family name, speak in a clear, adult-like voice, and politely take a message. Johnson residence, this is he. It was like you were a tiny, unpaid receptionist for your own home. Picking up and just saying hello was a crime against civilization. 51. Eat your bread crusts, it'll make your hair curly. There is no scientific basis for this. None. It's one of the most bafflingly specific lies ever told. This was a desperate last-ditch effort by parents who were sick of cutting the edges off sandwiches. It was a piece of culinary propaganda designed entirely for their own convenience. 52. Patience is a virtue. This was the standard response to, "Are we there yet?" or "When is dinner ready?" It was presented as a deep, philosophical teaching on the importance of waiting. In reality, it was just a prettier, more condescending way of saying, "Stop annoying me, I'm busy." 53. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. This piece of nutritional gospel just so happened to be popularized by the very same companies that were trying to sell you boxes of processed sugar disguised as cereal. It was one of the most brilliant marketing campaigns of all time, masquerading as timeless parental wisdom. 54. The ultimate shutdown to any argument involving your friends. If all your friends jumped off a bridge, would you do it too? This wasn't a lesson in critical thinking. It was a spectacularly flawed analogy. It taught us that our parents were not only unwilling to debate the actual topic, but were also masters of the dramatic, nonsensical hypothetical. 55. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. This might be the most damaging lie on the entire list. It was a well-intentioned but completely naive attempt to teach resilience. The real lesson we all learned, painfully, is that broken bones heal, but the right words can stick with you for a lifetime. 56. In every house there was a sacred object, a forbidden idol that must never be touched: the thermostat. You were taught that a single-degree adjustment by an unauthorized child could trigger a chain reaction leading to financial ruin and a lecture of biblical proportions. The lesson wasn't about energy conservation. It was an early introduction to the concept of a household dictatorship. 57. The absolute pinnacle of parenting logic, delivered to a crying child. Stop that crying or I'll give you something to really cry about. This was a psychological checkmate. It was a threat that promised to validate the very emotion it was trying to suppress. The only lesson learned here was that adult frustration can create paradoxes that would baffle a quantum physicist. 58. The mythical permanent record. This was the ultimate ghost story for school-aged children. A shadowy, all-knowing file that documented every time you talked in class or threw a spitball. It would follow you for life, presented to every future employer and college admissions officer. The truth is, this boogeyman was just an administrative tool for parents and teachers who ran out of actual threats. 59. Well, life isn't fair. This wasn't a piece of profound wisdom. It was the verbal white flag of parenting. It was the official shutdown for any childhood complaint about injustice, from a sibling getting a bigger piece of cake to a genuinely unfair punishment. It didn't teach resilience. It taught you that your parents had officially given up on trying to explain the world. 60. The irrational, media-fueled terror of quicksand. According to every TV show from the 70s and 80s, quicksand was a major, everyday threat you could encounter on the way to the grocery store. We were taught to fear it more than taxes. The real lesson is that your parents let you watch way too much television, creating anxieties about problems that you would never ever face. 61. Never negotiate your first offer. Be grateful. Translation: leave money on the table and smile. Companies expect counteroffers. The grateful act is how you donate lifetime income to corporate profits. Ask for more. Worst case, they just say no. 62. The teacher is always right. This was the golden rule of school. It didn't matter if the teacher was having a bad day, made a mistake, or was just plain wrong. Your job was to sit there, take it, and never question authority. This didn't create respectful students. It created a generation of kids who were terrified to think critically or challenge a flawed argument. 63. Leaving a light on in an empty room was not a simple mistake. It was a mortal sin. You were taught that a single 60-watt bulb left burning for 10 minutes was the financial equivalent of setting a pile of cash on fire in the living room. The nightly house tour of your dad flipping off switches wasn't about saving the planet. It was a ritual of asserting economic dominance. 64. If you swallow a watermelon seed, a watermelon will grow in your stomach. This wasn't a joke. It was presented as a terrifying biological possibility. We all had vivid nightmares of vines sprouting from our ears. This was pure agricultural body horror, designed to make you so scared that you'd never dream of being a messy eater again. 65. Don't make that face, it'll freeze that way. This was the standard response to any kid practicing their silly faces in the mirror. It was a bizarre, supernatural threat that combined bad medicine with bad meteorology. The lesson was clear. Spontaneous displays of non-approved fun are dangerous and could lead to permanent disfigurement. Conformity was safety. 66. A little hard work is its own reward. This was the philosophical justification for assigning you a series of grueling, unpaid chores, like weeding the entire garden on a 90-degree day. It's a beautiful sentiment if you're trying to build a pyramid. For a kid who just wanted to watch cartoons, it was the first bitter taste of being tricked into doing something for free under the guise of character development. 67. The ultimate parental trump card, deployed when all logic had failed. Because I'm the parent, that's why. This phrase was the conversational equivalent of a nuclear bomb. It instantly vaporized any argument, debate, or plea for reason. The lesson wasn't about respect. It was a raw, unfiltered demonstration of a power hierarchy. Might, in this case, made right. 68. When you had a bad burn, what was the first thing Grandma told you to do? Put some butter on it. This wasn't just wrong. It was the exact opposite of what you should do. It literally traps the heat in, making the burn worse. This was a classic piece of passed-down wisdom that felt right, but was dangerously, horribly incorrect. 69. Microwaves nuke nutrients. The scary word was doing all the work. Shorter cook times actually preserve vitamins better than boiling your broccoli into a green ghost. Your leftovers aren't radioactive. Your science class was. 70. Find a penny, pick it up, all day long you'll have good luck. This charming rhyme was a lesson in microeconomics that was completely useless. It taught you to focus on the smallest possible financial gain while completely ignoring the bigger picture. You could spend all day looking for pennies and still be broke. It was a lesson in being busy, not productive. 71. The ultimate solution for a misbehaving, dusty, or otherwise inconvenient area rug was simple. Take it outside and beat it. This wasn't just a cleaning method. It was a life lesson in solving problems with brute force. It taught us that if something is giving you trouble, the most effective solution is to hang it over a clothesline and whack it repeatedly with a stick until it submits. 72. The sacred ritual of saving the good china. In every home, there was a cabinet full of beautiful plates, glasses, and silverware that were never, ever to be used. They were reserved for a mythical special occasion that never seemed to arrive. The lesson wasn't about appreciating fine things, it was about hoarding them for a fantasy future, while you ate off chipped plates in the present. 73. Every dad in America had the same magical healing technique for any minor injury: a ridiculously oversized, flesh-colored bandage. It didn't matter if it was a paper cut or a pinprick, the solution was to slap a bandage on it that was big enough to cover a gunshot wound. This taught us that the appearance of medical care was often more important than the actual medical care itself. 74. Boys don't cry. That line taught a whole generation to shove every feeling into a locked basement and throw away the key. Result? Men who apologize for having emotions and call it being tough. Newsflash: stoic isn't the same as healthy, and therapy isn't weakness. 75. The great American driving lesson: when your dad takes you to an empty parking lot and just starts yelling. The core instruction wasn't about clutch control or parallel parking. It was about learning to operate a 2-ton metal box while a furious, red-faced man screams contradictory advice in your ear. It was less of a driving lesson and more of a stress test for future combat pilots. 76. You need to learn to share. This was the law of the playground, but it came with a massive loophole. The rule only applied to your cool new toy that you just got for your birthday. The old broken toy that nobody wanted? Suddenly, the lesson in mandatory sharing didn't seem to apply. It was our first introduction to the baffling and often hypocritical rules of socialism. 77. The belief that all problems, emotional or physical, could be solved by getting some fresh air. Feeling sad? Go outside. Feeling sick? Fresh air will fix it. Bored? You know the answer. It was the universal parental prescription, a cure-all that required zero effort on their part. It didn't solve anything, but it did get you out of their hair for a few minutes. 78. Don't run with scissors. This was a reasonable and important safety tip. The problem was, it was often the only safety tip. We were taught to fear the deadly combination of running and scissors more than anything else, while being completely unprepared for more realistic dangers like sticking a fork in a toaster or mixing household chemicals to see what happens. 79. The absolute certainty that playing video games would rot your brain. This wasn't based on science. It was based on a deep primal fear of a glowing box that your parents didn't understand. They saw it as a one-way ticket to a life of unemployment and failure, completely missing the fact that it was actually teaching problem-solving, hand-eye coordination, and strategic thinking. 80. The sacred parental duty of embarrassing you in front of your friends. This wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate power move. Whether it was telling a baby story, showing off a naked baby picture, or using outdated slang, the goal was to remind you, and everyone you knew, exactly who was in charge. It was a lesson in humility, delivered with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. 81. The ultimate threat for picky eaters. You'll sit there until you finish that. This turned the dinner table into a Cold War standoff, a battle of wills between a stubborn child and an even more stubborn parent over a plate of cold broccoli. The lesson wasn't about nutrition. It was about absolute unconditional surrender in the face of terrible cooking. 82. Never discuss politics or religion at the dinner table. This was presented as the key to a polite and civilized society. What it actually did was create a generation of people who have no idea how to have a respectful disagreement about important topics. It taught us that the best way to handle controversial subjects is to just pretend they don't exist. 83. The baffling parental obsession with making your bed every single morning. This was a non-negotiable daily chore. It didn't make the room cleaner, and you were just going to mess it up again in 16 hours. The lesson wasn't about hygiene. It was about learning to perform a pointless, repetitive task to satisfy an arbitrary authority figure. It was perfect training for a future office job. 84. Crack a window, you'll air out a cold. Viruses aren't scared of a breeze. All you did was freeze the kids and start a thermostat war. Hygiene helps. Sleep helps. Opening a window just drafts the living room and angers your father. 85. The ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card for any parental mistake. We did the best we could. This phrase wasn't an apology. It was a conversation ender. It was an impenetrable shield against any criticism or discussion of past failures. It didn't teach forgiveness. It taught that good intentions were a perfectly acceptable substitute for actual competence. 86. The phone cord must never, under any circumstances, be stretched. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a law of physics. According to our parents, stretching that coiled wire would permanently damage it, creating a kind of telephone arthritis. The real lesson was about control, ensuring you couldn't take the phone into another room for a private conversation. 87. Spare the rod, spoil the child. This wasn't just a saying, it was a complete management philosophy. It was the primitive HR policy for the family unit, a lesson that taught us that complex behavioral issues could be solved with the swift and efficient application of brute force. It was character building, apparently. 88. The magical belief that children are resilient. This was the all-purpose excuse for a wide range of questionable parenting choices, from emotional neglect to letting you eat questionably old leftovers. It wasn't a statement of fact. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card that framed you not as a fragile kid, but as an indestructible rubber ball that would just bounce back from anything. 89. Being bored was not a state of being. It was a moral failing. The moment you uttered the words, "I'm bored," you weren't just looking for something to do. You were confessing to a crime of having a defective imagination. The punishment was, invariably, a list of chores that would make you wish for the sweet, sweet relief of boredom again. 90. You hug every relative no matter what. Polite? Maybe. Great way to blur consent? Absolutely. We trained kids to ignore their own discomfort so Aunt Linda wouldn't feel awkward. Here's a wild upgrade. Bodily autonomy beats performative manners. 91. Don't interrupt adults when they're talking. This rule wasn't about teaching politeness. It was about establishing a rigid social hierarchy. It taught you that whatever adults were discussing, usually boring stuff like mortgages or lawn care, was infinitely more important than the world-shattering news that you just found a cool-looking bug in the yard. 92. The ultimate parental problem solver. Go play outside. This wasn't a suggestion for healthy activity. It was an ejection sequence. It was the verbal equivalent of shoving you out the airlock with a vague command to be back before the streetlights come on. It was less about your well-being and more about their desperate need for a few minutes of peace. 93. The legend of the hard-earned dollar. Money wasn't just currency, it was a sacred artifact, forged in the fires of suffering and manual labor. This lesson made it seem like every single dollar your parents had was acquired through Herculean effort, turning a simple request for ice cream money into an act of profound disrespect for their life's work. 94. The terrifying medical diagnosis of square eyes. This was the inevitable result of watching too much television. We all pictured our eyeballs literally morphing into tiny, flickering cubes. It was a piece of cartoonish body horror designed to make you fear the TV as a device of monstrous transformation. 95. The mandatory, non-negotiable afternoon nap. As a kid, this was a daily prison sentence, a cruel and unusual punishment that stole precious hours of playtime. The dumbest part of this lesson is that it was absolutely 100% correct. We just didn't realize it until we were 30 years old and would trade anything for a forced nap. 96. The most powerful motivating force in the universe. What will the neighbors think? This wasn't a question, it was a threat. It taught us that the most important moral compass wasn't our own conscience, but the imagined judgment of the people living next door. Your entire family's reputation rested on you not having a tantrum in the front yard. 97. The Great Dessert Negotiation. You were taught that dessert wasn't a part of the meal. It was a reward for surviving the ordeal of eating your vegetables. This was a child's first lesson in hostage situations. The broccoli was the captive, your happiness was the prize, and your parents were the stone-cold negotiators. 98. The magic words. Please and thank you weren't expressions of genuine gratitude. They were transactional cheat codes. You learned that saying them was the verbal equivalent of inserting a coin into a machine to get what you wanted from an adult. It was less about politeness and more about learning to game the system. 99. The pre-Google parental shutdown. Go look it up in the encyclopedia. This wasn't an attempt to foster independent research skills. This was the intellectual equivalent of go ask your mother. It was a brilliant strategy for a parent who had absolutely no idea what the answer was and wanted to shift the burden of knowledge onto a giant, dusty book. 100. The ultimate behavioral control system. Santa is watching you. This wasn't a charming holiday myth. It was a lesson in living under a 24/7 surveillance state run by a jolly old man with a global network of elf informants. It taught us that being good was a performance, especially when a long list of gifts was on the line. 101. And finally, the most powerful justification in the entire parenting handbook. The phrase that could make any unpleasant action seem noble. This is for your own good. This wasn't a reason. It was a magic shield. It was deployed right before a terrible home haircut, forcing you to eat a vegetable that tasted like despair, or making you wear an itchy sweater knitted by a distant relative. The lesson wasn't about your well-being. It was the ultimate parental power move, teaching you that their will, no matter how miserable it made you, was somehow a selfless gift for your benefit. And that's the glorious, flawed, and absolutely insane wisdom that raised us. A world of seatbelt death traps, magic carrots, and the constant looming threat of our faces freezing in place. It's a miracle any of us turned out normal, or semi-normal. Now I have to ask, what is the single dumbest life lesson your parents taught you that we somehow missed? I want to see the most unhinged, ridiculous examples you've got down in the comments. If this trip down a very weird memory lane made you laugh, hit that like button. And if you want to keep questioning everything you were ever taught, subscribe. You know what to do.